In this section, we're going to continue to building out our landing page content. So far, we created our hero section, our heading, and our cards. In this video, we're going to take a look how to create this image with content. Then we're going to create our Markdown component, and then we're going to work on this person card. And all of these sections are going to follow that same pattern like we did before. We're going to create a new component in our block section to represent the data that we want to display. Then we're going to add that data to our landing page into the dynamic blocks. And then we'll be able to have access to those new blocks that we created inside our landing page here. And we'll be able to add the content by adding the new blocks that we haven't made yet. So let's go ahead and do that now. We're going to start by focusing on our image with content component. In our application, we're going to have this component that on the left side is going to have an image, and then that's going to have some heading and text. And just like we see on our mockup, we want to give the user the ability to reverse the image and the content. And you also notice that we do also have a link here. So we also want to make sure that we add our link component that we created earlier to give users the options, not only to have the heading, the text, but also add the link. So now let's jump into Strapi and start building out this component. So in our Strapi application, let's go to our content type builder and let's scroll to the bottom, click on create new component. And we're going to call this component content with image. Very original. Now let's select the category that we want. We know this is going to be our blocks. And let's go ahead, click and continue. We know that we want the user to easily have the ability to mark the component reversed or not. So for that, we could use a Boolean content type. So in the content type builder, let's click on the Boolean field and we're going to call it reversed. And we're going to go to advanced settings, and by default, it's going to be false. So back in our basic settings, make sure that we spelled it correctly. Sounds good. Let's click add another field. And in our component, we also have our heading and text. Let's add that first. So for heading, I'm going to use the text field, short text, and I'm going to call this heading. Let's click add another field. For our text, I prefer using Markdown, especially since we're going to be building our front end with Astro in future tutorials. So we're going to click this rich text Markdown, and I'm going to call it content. Now let's add another field. We know that our content is going to have a link. So let's go ahead, add our link component. So back in our Strapi builder, let's go ahead to components. We're going to say use existing component, select component. We're going to call it link. Let's select our link component, and it's going to be a single component. Now let's finally add another field. Let's select our media. We're going to say single media. We're going to call this image. And under advanced settings, let's go ahead and only select images. Back to basic settings, making sure everything looks good. Let's click finish. So now here we have our content with image component. We have the reverse Boolean to allow us to specify if the image is on the left or on the right. We have our heading, our content, and we have our links and our image. Let's go ahead, click save. Now we're going to navigate to our landing page, and we want to add that component to our blocks. So let's click the plus button, use existing component. Let's select our content with image and click finish and save. With that being done, if we navigate back to our content manager, we will be able to select our landing page, and now we're able to add our content. So if I click add component to block, you now see that we have our content with image. Let's go ahead and click on it. And now we are able to add our content. You can put whatever image or text that you like here. I'm going to go ahead from my mockup that I have here. So I'm going to copy the heading, put my heading. Then I'm going to take my content, copy the content. On our first block, there's no link, so I'm going to skip that. And I'm going to go ahead and grab this image. So I'm going to click on the image element, go to assets, and I'm going to add one more image. You could add whatever image you like. I'm going to add the image of the forest here. Click open, upload my assets, and save. So now notice we have our first content with image. Fantastic. So now I'm going to go ahead and add my second component. So add component block. Let's select our content with image. And this is going to be reversed. So I'm going to say true. And I'm going to copy and paste that same lorem ipsum. Add my heading. Now I'm going to do the same thing here for the content. Add my content. And let's add a link. I'm just going to link it to the Strapi website, https strapi.io. Label is going to be try Strapi. Is external true? Is button link? We'll say true. And this, again, is going to give us the ability on the front end to check if we want to add any additional styling that we could do later. And the type, I'm going to say primary if you want the primary button. And this is something that we're going to code in the future tutorials when we're building out the front end. And finally, let's add our image. I'm going to go to Assets, add my forest image, and click Finish. Now that we have our second block, this is pretty cool. So we created our content with image component. We added it to our blocks. So now let's go ahead and publish our content. In previous tutorials, we all know the drill. In order to allow us to see the content, for instance, when we make a GET request to our endpoint landing page, for instance, right now, it's not going to show up here because we did not specify this inside our populate landing page middleware that we created in previous videos. So let's go ahead and do that now. Let's navigate to our landing page, populate middleware. And inside our populate component, we have this pattern where we're specifying what blocks we want to show. So now we're going to create a new entry for blocks, and we called it content with image. We know that our top level fields will populate automatically, but we have two fields that are relationships. So taking a look in our content type builder, content with image, we know that the link is going to be a relationship. So we have to tell Strapi to populate it, and the same thing with the image. So let's go ahead and do that. This shouldn't be that difficult because we did it in the past. So if we want to populate the link, we'll say link equals true. If we want to populate the image, we're going to say image and the fields that we want. So because we have done this before, we could just select the previous logic from our blocks hero section, and we could add it here with content in image. So we're basically saying, yes, populate our link, and yes, populate our image. Now that this is done, make sure that you restart your Strapi instance after making backend changes like we just did in our middleware. Once a Strapi instance starts, jumping back into Postman, when we hit send, so path blocks, invalid key links add blocks. Okay, this is the issue we get with copy and pasting. So let's go back to our landing page, populate, and inside our blocks content with image, we don't have multiple links. We actually have one link. So let's delete that extra S. And that should be a good reason why copy and pasting sometimes is not the best approach, but that's okay. And the reason why it's links, if you take a look, that's what we called it here, where in our hero section, we had multiple links, which is perfectly fine. So that was an easy mistake to fix. So now that we have this and we fixed the spelling, we're referencing a single link because we're only going to have a single link back inside of our Postman in our VS Code. Let's click send, and boom, we now have our blocks. We're getting all the other blocks that we had before. And now you're going to notice that we're getting our blocks data for content with image. We have our first block and we have our second block, and we could see that it's reverse true. It has our heading, our content, our links, and our image. Fantastic. Now that we know that we're getting data for our content with image block, we can start working on this content block, which is just going to be our markdown. This is going to be very easy to make. So let's go ahead and do that now. Back in our Strapi instance, let's go create a new component. And we're just going to call this markdown. For categories, we're going to say blocks. Let's click continue. And to this, we're going to add a new field. And it's going to be our rich text markdown field. And we're going to call this content. Let's go ahead, click finish. And that's all we really need for this component. Let's click save. Let's go ahead to our landing page. And we're going to add our new markdown block. So let's select the markdown block. Click finish and save. Now let's navigate to our content manager and select our landing page. And here, when we click add component block, we should see our markdown block available to us. Let's click on it and let's add our content. I'm just going to copy and paste this content. Because we're using markdown, I'm going to make these headings, and you could also preview your markdown in preview mode that you could see here. You could also do them side by side, which I think is pretty cool. Now that we have our markdown content, let's go ahead and publish. Back in our landing page populate middleware, now we're going to add a populate field for our markdown. So we're going to say blocks.markdown and true. Just like this. Nice. Now that we have this, so now let's refire our request. And if we scroll all the way down, we should see, boom, we have our markdown content. Perfect. And finally, the last component that we're going to take a look in this video, it's going to be our person card, which is going to have our image, our text, the name of the person, and what they do. So let's go ahead and build this out in our Strapi application. So back in our content type builder, let's create a new component. And we're going to have a very original name called person card. This is going to live in our blocks folder. Let's click continue. Our first element is going to be media, which is going to be our image. We're only going to have single image. So let's select single media. Under advanced settings, let's again only allow images. Okay, this looks good. Let's add another field. Next, we have this content block. So we're going to just say text. So let's use our text field. We're going to select long text and we're going to say text. Let's add another field. And finally, we have person name and person title or person job. So let's go ahead and add those. Those are going to be simple enough because they're just going to be our text field. So let's add person name. Let's add another field, text. Again, keep it short text, and it's going to be person job. And let's click finish. So here you could see we have our image, our text, person name, person job, exactly representing that the data we have. The image, our text, person name, person job. So since this looks good, let's click save. And let's navigate to our landing page. Let's add our person block. Let's select our person block card. Click finish and save. Now let's navigate back to our content manager. Go to our landing page. And now we have access to our newly created person block. Let's go ahead and fill in the data. So I'm going to go ahead, copy this lorem ipsum in my person card. Let's add that lorem ipsum text. Fantastic. Let's add an image. I'm going to go to assets, add more assets, browse a file. And some here I have the image of the woman. If you're wondering where I got all these images, let me just make sure we click finish. You can go to pexels.com. This is a great website to get some free stock images, which is pretty awesome. So now let's add person name and person's job. So person name, we're going to say Alice Bradley. And the job is backend developer. And now that we have this, let's go ahead, click publish. This is going to save our changes and publish them. And now we need to go into our populate middleware to specify that we want to populate this person card. Little challenge for you. If we take a look at the person card component, from these fields, image, text, person, and person job, which field do we have to tell Strapi to populate? If you picked image, you are correct because image is a relation. Text, person name, and person job are top level fields, and they will be populated automatically. So let's go ahead back to our VS Code, and inside our landing page populate, we're going to add the populate logic to populate our person card. So we're going to say blocks dot person card, and we want to populate our image. We're going to follow the similar pattern that we have above here. So we're going to say populate, and we're going to say image, and then specify the fields that we want to populate, which are alternative text and our URL. Perfect. Now that we have this here, I made sure to restart my Strapi instance. And now back in our Postman, if you click send, scroll all the way to the bottom, notice that we have our person card with the text, the person name, person job, and the image. Nice. We're making some progress. Now, before we take a break, I do want to just give you a little bit more context on what we're doing here. So in this tutorial, we have this basic mock-up for our front-end website. So right now, what we're doing is we're taking a look at our mock-up, seeing what data we want to represent in our backend, and we're creating that backend using Strapi. And here we have the completed project of our Strapi backend. If you take a look at the content manager, we're representing different data types from our front end that we want to represent. For instance, we're going to have our dynamic pages like about. We're going to have our blog section, which is going to have our different types of blogs. And we're going to have a single view. And so based on this mock-up that your designer or you have created, we're figuring out how to structure and represent this data in our backend. And in our Strapi application, we're accomplish that by using our single types, our collection types, and our components. Currently in our project, we created our global page to represent our header and footer data. We created our landing page, or at least working on finishing, to represent our landing page data. So here, taking a look at the landing page, we have all the different components that will represent our website data that we see here on the landing page. And once we build out our API, we are able to test it with Postman and see that we are getting that data served to us from our API. Once you have your API, you could now start building your front end. You could use any technology you like. You could use Astro, Next.js, Remixed, React Native, Vue.js, Angular, because Strapi is framework agnostic. All it does is serves the data that we have created in our Strapi application. So you could have this Strapi instance power your website, your mobile app, and you use the data that you want. Once you have your API completed, you could start working on your front end. For instance, in the future, we're going to work on building out this project. So notice how in this folder, we have our server, which is our Strapi application that we're building now. And then you could also have your client app. This could be Next.js. This could be Astro. In this case, to keep it simple, I decided to go with Astro. If you take a look here, when building out your front end, and every different framework does this slightly different. But if we take a look at our pages and we look at our index page, which is our landing page, you could see that the basic pattern is I'm getting my landing page data, and this can be easily achieved by using Strapi SDK. So if you take a look at the code here, get landing page data, if you scroll to the top, I'm pulling in Strapi client from Strapi SDK, and I'm able to create very easy method that allows us to get our data. And then basically we make a request to get our data, like you could see here. And once we have that data, we're able to have access to it in our front end, and we would pass it to a component to render the data to screen. And when we build out our front end, we'll learn this blocks pattern, where basically you create a component that is responsible populating your blocks. For instance, a hero section, card grid, content with image, all the components that we're building out in our backend right now, you'll be able to create a map, which will have all the different components available to you from your Strapi application that will have the equal component in your front-end framework. And then based on the response that we get, for instance, notice in our response, we have our blocks and it has a couple of different blocks available to us. And what we do is we iterate through our response, and based on our matching blocks, we will render those specific blocks. And what's awesome, this allows you to dynamically build out those pages based on the response from your Strapi application. And again, I just wanted to give this to have as a quick introduction to kind of show you where we're heading, which is first build out our backend that non-technical users could easily add data through this amazing admin panel. And then we're going to create our front-end application to consume our API. Some people like to create the front-end first and then build the API. I like the approach is get a design, look at the mockup, figure out how to represent the data, build out your API first, and then build out your front-end. Anyway, with that being said, let's take another break, and I'll see you all in the next video.